Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. This story happened to me during the lunar 7th month, about 5 years ago, at Block 262, Yushin Street 22. I went over to my ex's house for dinner around 6 p.m. After dinner, I was bored and decided to play with my ex's niece, nephews, and a bunch of other kids, aged around 5 to 8 years old, in one of the bedrooms. I was watching the kids play when suddenly, a 5-year-old niece, Crystal, tripped over an English baby doll, the kind with blinking eyes and eyelashes. You know, the ultra-creepy kind. Crystal started crying. Like most Chinese parents who hit whatever hurt their precious little child, I picked up the doll and started spanking its bottom repeatedly. It worked, and Crystal started giggling. I put the doll down on the ground and went to the living room to watch TV. Suddenly, my ex's older sister, Brenda, came out from the adjacent room, asking which kid was the little prankster who had tapped her from behind several times. Hearing the commotion, I asked her what had happened. She explained that she was in the bedroom adjacent to the kids' room, where the door was left ajar and the lights were turned off because her fiancé was taking a nap. With nothing else to do, she was gazing out of the window at the mall opposite the flat when someone tapped her lower back from behind. The first time, she ignored it, brushing it off as one of the kids playing a prank. The second time, she turned around and caught a glimpse of a half-naked kid dashing out of her room. Thinking the kids were trying to play with her, she looked for them in the other rooms but was puzzled to find that all of them were fully clothed. She was certain of what she had seen but came out of the room, confused. Who exactly was that little kid who was half naked? Brenda immediately related the incident to her aunt, who then sought help from a bomo over the phone. A bomo is basically a Malay shaman. This is where the creepy part begins. The bomo told her aunt to enter the children's room and look under the bed. He even described a feature for identification: the doll under the bed had blue eyes. I accompanied their aunt to the room and retrieved the doll. To my astonishment, it was the same doll I had spanked earlier. At that moment, many questions raced through my head. How did the bomo know there was a doll under the bed? How did he know the color of the doll's eyes? Why didn't the kid look for me, since I was the one who spanked the doll? The bomo immediately instructed their aunt to leave the doll under a tree in the estate's park, and we did as instructed. Later that night, after we went out for supper, we returned to find the doll already taken from the tree. More questions popped up in my mind. Who in their right mind would dare to pick up such a doll during the night of the lunar 7th month? My mom always emphasized never to pick up things during the 7th month as they might be spiritually dirty. I kept quiet about the doll spanking incident for fear of getting scolded by my ex. Of all the questions that went through my mind that night, only one was answered by a medium who was a friend of my mom. She claimed that I was somewhat untouchable by dirty stuff because I have a pair of really thick eyebrows. Glad I have them. This is a story about a haunted doll. The doll, named William, was the size and weight of a young toddler. My grandmother bought William at a flea market in the mid-1970s. He, or it, was dirty, naked, and torn, but something about the doll appealed to her, so she bought him anyway. She cleaned him up, dressed him in toddler-sized clothes, and placed him in a rocker in her parlor. Over the years, she regularly bought new outfits for William and kept him clean, always returning him to his designated spot in the rocker. Even as a child, William unnerved me. Not only did I have a phobia of mannequins, but William's lifelike features and strange expression made him even more unsettling. His face carried an eerie look that seemed too knowing, too aware, for a doll meant to represent a young child. To me, he wasn't just a doll, he seemed like an adult in miniature, a not particularly nice adult. When I was 10, William felt like he was watching me, knowing where I slept, and wanting me to know that he knew. Despite my unease, William never gave any indication of being more than just a doll while I was growing up. However, everything changed after my grandmother passed away, and William went to live with my Aunt Lorraine and Uncle Nelson. Their children, Michelle and David, were 11 and 9 years old, just about the same age I had been when I first encountered William. Both kids found him unnerving, especially because of the way their mother had placed him on a wingback chair in the living room. From that spot, William could see the doors to both of their bedrooms. Even with their doors closed at night, Michelle said she could feel William's gaze, like he was waiting for her to come out. Eventually, it seemed William grew tired of waiting. One night, David got up to use the bathroom and noticed that William wasn't in his usual spot. Thinking his mother had moved the doll, he didn't think much of it until he returned to his room. To his horror, William was back in his chair, staring at him. Panicked, David shut and locked his door. A few nights later, Michelle also got up during the night. Casting a wary glance at William, she found him sitting in his usual spot. After entering the bathroom, she noticed the toilet paper roll was empty and went to the linen closet in the hall to grab a new one. When she turned back, she was startled to see William lying crumpled on the floor, a few feet away from his chair. To her, it looked as though William had climbed down and was heading toward her room, but stopped when she came out. Terrified, Michelle ran back to her room, choosing to wait until morning to finish her trip to the bathroom. The next morning, as Michelle opened her door, William fell into her room. He had been leaning against the door, as if waiting for her to open it. Her scream woke the entire house. Lorraine and Nelson couldn't ignore what was happening any longer. Though Nelson didn't believe the doll was haunted, Lorraine had already been experiencing strange occurrences. She frequently found William out of his chair, even though she could see no way he could fall out on his own. Once, she even woke from a nap to find William lying beside her in bed, a prank she initially blamed on the kids, but later reconsidered. After Michelle's terrifying encounter, Nelson decided to put the doll in the attic, hoping to calm the children. A few weeks later, he mentioned the situation to my mother, who expressed interest in taking William. When Nelson went to retrieve the doll, however, William was nowhere to be found. Despite tearing the attic apart, the doll had vanished. That was nearly 10 years ago, and William has never turned up again. To this day, I can't help but wonder where he went, and whether he might one day return. This is a story from my elementary school days. Apologies if it's not well written, I'm not great at storytelling. However, I love ghost stories, even though I get scared easily. For instance, when I'm alone at night, I can't look directly at the mirror or TV in my room. I usually turn off all the lights quickly and hide under the covers. In my room, there was a doll, a cheap imitation of a French doll. I didn't mind it when I was younger, but as I grew older, it started to scare me. To ease my fear, I turned its face sideways so it wouldn't look at me. That night, something terrifying happened. My body froze, and I couldn't move. My breathing was shallow and labored. Suddenly, a strange sensation entered my right ear, a rough, male voice murmuring what sounded like a spell. I panicked, trying to speak, but the harder I tried, the more difficult it became to breathe. My vision was pitch black, and I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or closed. Then, I heard a sharp cracking sound. My mind raced, thinking, it's broken. Suddenly, the whole room lit up as if nothing had happened. I convinced myself it was just a terrible nightmare and tried to calm down. As I looked around the room, I felt relieved, until I noticed something chilling. The doll, which I had turned sideways earlier, was now facing me directly. Panic consumed me, and I ran to my parents' room to sleep. The next day at school, I told my childhood friend, who lived next door, about the terrifying dream. She dismissed it with a casual "oh," taking it lightly. Later that day, I invited her to my house and showed her the doll. To my surprise, she seemed excited. "Wow, it's a big doll. That's nice. This is the one from your dream, right? It's cute. If you don't like it, can I have it?" she said. I hesitated, but eventually, I gave her the doll since she seemed so eager. She took it to her house that evening. The next morning, I looked in the mirror and was horrified to see the right half of my face covered in what looked like acne. It was gross, but I went to school as usual. My friend noticed my face and screamed, "What's that?" Pretending not to know, I replied, "What? Acne?" She handed me a small mirror, and I was shocked to see that the acne had turned into bright red scratches. At the nurse's office, my teacher dismissed it as inflamed pimples, but I hadn't even touched my face. I thought about the doll, but tried not to dwell on it. That night, as I lay in bed, the right side of my face felt unbearably hot. My hair, damp with sweat, clung to my neck. I heard yelling from my friend's house, but I assumed it was the usual family argument. Suddenly, someone shouted, "Fire!" I jumped out of bed, convinced it was my house. I ran to check my brother's room, thinking a smoking habit had finally caused trouble. To my shock, it was my childhood friend's house in flames. My parents rushed outside, telling me to stay in my room. Shivering, I eventually fell asleep. The next day, more than half of her house had burned down. At school, we were informed about the fire and asked to bring donations. My friend attended school as usual, but everyone kept their distance, unsure of what to say. During a quiet moment, she told me the story herself. My dad found the doll and got really mad. He asked me where I got it, and I told him it was from you. He started yelling, set it on fire, and threw it to the floor. Hearing her mention the doll sent shivers down my spine. "What? The doll?" I stammered. She continued, "Yeah, but the fire went out quickly. Its face was burned, though, so I threw it away." "Sorry." I nodded silently, unable to process it all. Her father, known for his temper, had a history of destructive behavior, including setting things on fire. The official cause of the fire was attributed to his carelessness. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was connected: the doll's eerie presence, the spell-like voice in my ear, the inflammation on my face, the heat I felt, and the burned face of the doll. It was terrifying. Since then, my friend's family moved away. She's now in high school and doing well. Oddly enough, she still collects dolls as a hobby. As for me, I've grown even more afraid of dolls after this incident. This happened about 10 years ago when I was in secondary school. That year, I had the morning session. Since my school was in Queenstown and I lived in Geelong, I had to leave the house quite early to catch the 7 a.m. bus. Normally, I would get up at 6 a.m. to get ready for school. The night before the incident, my sister and I had difficulty sleeping because it was very warm. We shared the same bedroom. Since our father was working the night shift, we decided to sleep in our mother's air-conditioned room. I still couldn't sleep, so at 5:30 a.m., I decided to take a bath and get ready for school. I took my bath in my mother's bathroom and then went back to my room to get ready. I was combing my hair when I heard somebody calling me, "Sister." I turned around, thinking my sister had woken up, but there was no one around. I went to my mother's room and found my sister still asleep. I grew scared, but brushed it off as my imagination. I went back to my room to get my school bag, and I heard it again. This time, I heard a small child's voice calling me, "Sister." I turned and saw my sister's doll, the one that cries when you take out the pacifier, and its eyes actually blinked at me. I immediately ran to my mom's room and stayed there until 6:45 a.m. Once I got home from school, I took the doll and threw it in the storeroom. Since then, I have banned all dolls from my room. My parents bought me a Snoopy doll, the character that always walks around with a blanket, for Christmas in 1999. It was actually my first Christmas present. I think my parents got it for me because it was my first book out during National Service, PTP. I was very touched. The doll is one of those with a turning key at the back. You turn the key, release it, and music starts playing while the doll's head moves. Eventually, I think the spring inside broke many years ago, maybe in 2001 or 2002. Even if you turn the key now, it won't turn back by itself, so there's no music. You have to force it yourself to get the music, and it requires a bit of strength, because the mechanism inside is quite rusty. However, I still kept the doll because it was a gift from my parents. I didn't touch it and just left it on top of my drawers as a display item. One time, I was inside my room's toilet doing my business and didn't close the door properly because I was alone at home. I was reading a book when, suddenly, I heard music coming from inside my room. The music sounded familiar, but I couldn't recall it immediately. It was quite eerie because I was home alone, and the sound seemed to come from nowhere. Then it hit me, it was the music from the doll. I was very scared at that moment because I knew the doll was broken, and unless you used a lot of strength to turn the key, it wouldn't play any music. The key is so hard to turn that you have to do it very slowly, which results in slow music. But the music I heard was playing at normal speed, something I hadn't heard since 2001 or 2002. After finishing in the toilet, barely, I admit, I peeked slowly into my room. The doll was still sitting there on the display drawer. Has anyone else had a similar experience or any idea what might have been the reason? Do you think the mechanism somehow became active again or had a last burst of life? Since then, I haven't heard the doll play again. The key is almost impossible to turn now. I'm afraid it might break if I use too much force. This is a scary experience that almost scared me half to death. When my parents got married, the couple who acted as matchmakers gave me a baby doll as a gift to celebrate my birth. The doll was the size of a 2-year-old child, with curly brown hair that was almost blonde. The joints in its limbs could be moved, making it a doll you could play with. It was a big version of what we now call Popo-chan. However, unlike Popo-chan, it wasn't cute. Its face was Western style, and not only was it not cute, but it also looked a little scary. When I put it to sleep, it closed its eyelids, which had long eyelashes. For some reason, this doll scared me ever since I was old enough to understand. It was quite large, and no matter where it was placed in the room, it had a strong presence. I just didn't like it, and it frightened me. When I was in 2nd grade, my parents were transferred, and we moved to a new house. I was given my own room for the first time, but the door to the room was warped and didn't close smoothly. I had to push it hard to close it, and it made a squeaking sound, so it rarely closed properly. I kept the scary baby doll next to the door, and even though it frightened me every day to see it, I still kept it in my room for some reason. One day, a few years after moving into the new house, I was spending time in my room with the door half open. When I approached the door to leave the room, the half-open door began to close on its own. I wondered if the wind was causing it to move. Just as I was about to put my hand on the doorknob, I looked at the baby doll next to me and saw its hand moving in time with the door closing. I couldn't immediately grasp the situation. I was too shocked to move. All I could think was, this is bad. I finally snapped out of it, opened the door with all my might just as it was about to shut, and ran to my mother to escape. In a panic, I explained what had happened and told my mother how scared I was of the baby doll. My mother laughed at how frantic I was, but agreed to move the doll to another room. After some time, she decided to take the doll to the storeroom at my paternal grandparents' house, because it was taking up too much space and had also begun to scare her. Even now, I can still find the doll in the storeroom if I search for it, but I don't feel like getting rid of it. It's human-shaped, and it feels wrong to dispose of it. I still can't forget the unnatural way the door closed or the sight of the doll's hands moving in unison. I even remember hearing a faint giggle from the doll at the time. Anytime I think about it, I'm filled with terror. Sorry for the long post. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.